Yeah. Okay, so we left off last time with Macbeth and the prophecies of the witches having come to partial fulfillment insofar as he is now the Thane of Cawdor. And we saw that his response to the prophecies was rather different than his friend Banquo's. Banquo, of course, as I said to you, being the great ancestor of the current king of England, also, or of the United Kingdom, I guess it would be, James. And so when we read that, we also need to understand something of the contemporary relevance of the play. And King James's own concerns with witchcraft and spiritual influence in deposing kings, and in installing them for that matter. So he's aware of an element that in contemporary politics is largely ignored, namely that of spiritual power, spiritual warfare, and so forth. So that isn't introduced as a theme here. Now, Shakespeare's not averse to this. We already saw in A Midsummer Night's Dream he was happy to appeal to the machinery of Puck and the realm of fairies. We could see this just as an imaginative appeal. And I think that would be the tendency for romantic, post-romantic ways of looking at things. Anything post-Enlightenment, actually, the idea that there is a spiritual realm, that it has an effect on human affairs, would, up until the Enlightenment, be seen as self-explanatory. Of course there is. But after the Enlightenment, there's a disenchantment of the universe in which everything is reduced to a sort of a natural explanation. Everything. And if we appeal to a spiritual power, that gets explained in terms of psychology. And when we get explained in terms of psychology, that pushes it back further. Well, but where does that come from? And in contemporary views of psychology, that gets explained in terms of biochemistry and so forth. So a materialist explanation. All of these are reductionisms. We're trying to take Shakespeare on the terms in which he would understand it and his contemporaries would understand it, at the very least, so that we can seek to understand a perspective, even if we don't share it. And I think in a Christian context, we have greater sympathy than a usual audience would these days. But even in terms of, if I were teaching this in the public universities, I would say, in order to really learn from another person, you have to put on hold your own biases and try and understand things through a lens other than your own, and this is what we call education. The whole basis of liberal learning is the openness to ideas that are not those that you would necessarily share at the outset. So that is there. There's no doubt in my mind that it is in Shakespeare's play, and that it's part of his whole framework, the Elizabethan world picture that I've spoken of a few times, in which it's evident in this play. So the natural doings of the play are reflected in supernatural significance. So here we're just talking about the murder of a king. In terms of power politics, you could just see it on that level. But Shakespeare attributes terrible events that transpire as a result of that. In nature, we have horses eating one another and so forth, and birds striking down hawks and so forth, lesser birds. So these are unnatural events in nature. So Shakespeare is suggesting that what is unnatural in politics and goes against the bonds of fellowship and fidelity has naturalistic correspondence. So the world itself seems to be out of joint because of what this man Macbeth does. He transgresses a moral boundary, and that has consequences even in the natural realm. And Shakespeare's connecting it furthermore to the spiritual realm of the witches. And when he does that, then he runs into the challenge, which is, I know, a matter of discussion in Christian circles to this day, and is troubling. To what degree are spiritual powers involved even in our rational processes? Can they actually overrule our reason? Can they force us to do things that we don't want to do? So there may be, even if we acknowledge that they are real, how great is the threat? At what point need we be very concerned? And as I said, just to reiterate what I said last time, Shakespeare, although he calls them witches and refers to them as the weird sisters, and that word weird is the Anglo-Saxon word suggesting the fates, the witches here are, he deviates from his source in Holinshed's Chronicles, and he's not suggesting that Macbeth has no choice here. It's not fated. They prophesy, and then he responds to it. He responds to it because he's already inclined to lust for power. He's an ambitious man, which is characteristic of the military as well. These are people who are intensely concerned with honor themselves, the code of honor, and they desire to do honorable things and to be seen to be doing honorable things and to be honored for those, and therefore the ranks and so forth. So it's not unreasonable. In fact, it's to be expected that if Macbeth is a honorable man and a good man, that he should seek higher honors. But therein lies the danger. And so when the witches prophesy that he will be Thane of Cawdor and also king, it reveals something about his ambitions that go beyond what they ought to be. And a darkness opens up there, which his contemporary Banquo notices right away. Because Banquo has a prophecy that's similarly attractive, but he does not seem to be moved by it in the same way. And so that's the first sign that something is amiss. Yes?
The whole everything being thrown into disarray, is it the idea that not only is like the chain of being been violated, but it's literally been broken?
It can never be broken.
Okay.
It can't be broken. It can be violated, but the order... so things revert to their first principles. What's the principle? In Shakespeare's Elizabethan worldview, and even in the Christian worldview, I'll say further than that, because this is where it derives from, because it's not just the Elizabethans came up with this. They believe that the fundamental principle of the whole created order is order. So it is orderly because God has created it to be orderly. So he separated the light from the darkness, goodness from evil, night from day, male from female. These are distinctions, and they're contrasts in some ways. But the two, some ways, are fitting for one another as well. They exist in a tension there, particularly the male and the female, right? And there can be a unity even in the distinctiveness. Now, they understand that is part of the created order outside of even our judgment upon them. That's just the way they are. Mm-hmm. Well, the reason they are that way is God made them that way. And they will go back to the Genesis account in the beginning when God said, and separated, right? And he called it good. And he remains ever sovereign over the created order. Now, human beings who have the capacity, as it says in Reformed articulations of this, have the capacity for secondary causes. So they can initiate events as causes themselves. So they have free will, in other words. Although I don't like the term, but they have the capacity for choosing things, and it's a genuine choice. They can instigate events. But that capacity never is so powerful that it undermines the basic givenness of the created order. They operate within that template.
So you're saying humans, like ourselves, we cannot introduce chaos into God's order?
A little bit. But it ultimately, the chaos can't last very long. And furthermore, evil, once unleashed, ends up consuming the person who unleashed it. So the chief sufferer of evil deeds is the evildoer in the end. And that would be expressed theologically through the existence of hell, which is a real topic in the play. And so there is and this is characteristic of the tragedy then. There is an order, the order is violated. There's an escalation of the disorder. We see it, so it begins with a revolt against the king, then we see it in the natural order of things, and then we see the initial agents subject to some sort of spiritual darkness, a hell, as it were, in their own minds. And it appears like, and then civil war breaks out. So it's now an escalation. But then in Shakespeare's tragedy, the order is always restored. And so it restores back to the way it ought to be, and that's because of divine influence behind the scenes.
I always saw it as the chain being broken, and because the chain is broken, everything, you know what a chain looks like.
I know what a chain looks like. Take a link out.
Take a link out, everything else is going to fall off. And for me, I always saw it as like the chain is one link, the king has been taken out.
Yeah.
Everything underneath him falls off.
Falls into disarray, but there's
when it gets restored, things go back to normal.
So that's a very interesting issue in itself. Is there such thing as a return to order, just as a natural thing? And the idea that people are not responsible for fighting evil, and is a topic of discussion for Christian writers throughout the ages. And Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings, who's probably basing some of his events on the events in Macbeth, right? Dunsinane would move, right? And again, same, the forests of Fangorn are moving. Where does he get that? Well, he gets it from Macbeth, of course. The idea that human agents just need to wait around and then a balance will be somehow restored that exists in nature, that's strongly resisted in the Christian tradition. I think the pacifists amongst us think that that is how it will be. We ought not to do that, and that some sort of order will be restored. The great balance of Christians over the ages have believed that you must fight and resist evil, if necessary by military means, in accordance with the nature of the threat and so forth. So there's the just war theory. Right, it has to be a commensurate response. It needs to be appropriate. There needs to be a certain degree of threat, etc., but you must push back. Otherwise, evil persists and gets more and more wicked. So what if Macbeth had not been resisted? What would have happened? Do you think God would have just struck him down? In any event, I mean, of course, that's entirely possible. But what are you called upon to do as free agents? Well, to exercise your free will in resisting evil. That would be, I think, everyone's response. And even if you're a pacifist, you would say, I'm going to resist, so I'm going to stand up and let myself get mowed down, I guess, and not fight back. Now, I've actually heard pacifists even say this in my classes over the years. So if somebody broke into your house with a weapon, what would you do? Would you protect your family? And I've had somebody say, it was a girl in my class over a decade ago, she said, no, I would not. But your kids are there. Nope. Really? Okay. I'd love to see that in action. Actually, I would not like to see that in action. But imagine, so it's easy to hypothesize when you're in a classroom, and now it's your little kids, and you got an intruder. Really? Somebody came into my house. I think I would not respond that way. And the Bible would authorize it as well, because it speaks of it in the Old Testament.
I doubt she would act that way.
I doubt she would as well, because she's got children now. I know her, but never mind. But it's easy when you're not faced with that scenario to imagine that this is the godly way forward. I don't think so. I think you're called to resist evil. We're not Buddhists.
Is evil for evil? So in the end, Macbeth gets his head lopped off. But spoiler alert.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't read it.
But that in itself is also an evil.
No, it's not. There's a difference between murder and war. There's a significant difference, which is addressed right at the outset of the play.
Yeah,
Macbeth is a hero for having slain his king's opponents, who were, in fact, bringing about a civil war, which is the worst thing that a city or a country can experience. And he put that down bloodily. And Shakespeare seems to regard him as a hero, or at least the characters represent it, and there's no contradictory statements. But then when he kills his king in peace times, it's regarded as a bloody act of murder. And Shakespeare just simply asserts that these are categorically distinct events.
So you don't think that even though it's quite personal between him and, what's his name?
Duncan.
With Duncan at the end, you don't think it's very, at the end it's a very personal battle where he gets his head chopped off.
You're talking about the fight at the end.
Yeah.
Well, that's not Duncan. Duncan's dead.
That's what's his face?
Macduff.
Lops off his head, and there it's personal. It is.
It's not, well, it's personal because there are two persons, but it's not personal insofar as Macduff is upholding the good of the kingdom of Scotland. And this bloody traitor, Macbeth, has killed the lawful king, and he's defending the law. He's not just defending the king. The king's dead, he can't bring him back. He's defending right order. You cannot allow somebody who is willing to do anything, even kill the king, to remain in rule. What will he not stop at? As we see Macbeth, he becomes more and more dangerous as the play progresses. Everybody is at risk. He will kill anybody who gets in his way. He must be stopped. And so he regards it as not just, this is just the two of us and I'm angry at you and I'm going to take it out. It's not, no, this man is a force for terrific evil now, and if he is not stopped, he will not stop. He must be stopped. So it goes way beyond the personal. Our problem is that we don't have this broader sense of good and evil beyond the personal. Everything's been reduced to the personal. There's no civic duty, there's no national, there's no patriotism, there's none of that. Shakespeare would find this incomprehensible. I find it incomprehensible. But those are the days in which we live. The counsel of Satan has spread far and wide, in my view. In any event, Macbeth becomes the Thane of Cawdor immediately after the witch's prophecy, and so he sees it, the prophecy, as even more valid because of that fact. So there's the proof, and therefore the king must follow equally quickly on its heels. There's the fallacious conclusion. But he wants that, so his desires influence his interpretation of the events. Now that's an interesting event as well. This play, Macbeth, I regard as a good play for illustrating the consequences of the Enlightenment, which, despite its own propaganda, is not the age of reason. It calls itself the age of reason. Concurrent with the rise of the age of reason is great bloody conflicts, revolutionary conflicts, irrational, limitless conflicts, genocides, and above all things, the distrust in reasoning. The distrust in reasoning and the assertion of pure willfulness and the will to power. That arises right in Macbeth, that what Nietzsche calls the will to power. He exemplifies that will to power, and that will to power is going to ignore his own moral reasoning, which he sees quite clearly. If I do this, I am no man. And by that he means no man of a moral nature, and yet he does it. So he throws aside reasoning and all of the consequences that will come with it. So he doesn't become irrational, he rejects reasoning because he wills it. Evil be thou my good. It's satanic in Milton's satanic sense. He chooses the evil thing because it fulfills his desires and his ambition. And that seems to me a very fit portrait of the post-Enlightenment state in our world, where people, whatever they choose, it's a person's right, a woman's right, a person's right. Whatever you choose is good as long as you want it. It's so. That's pure will not be contradicted by anybody's reasoning. You cannot reason with the pure will. That's the portrait of the 20th century, and it's still alive and well today. So the fact that the prophecies, and I spoke to this last time, just in terms of the effect of this, the fact that the prophecies are fulfilled prematurely, and I think they are premature. He seizes upon this right away in Act 1, makes the plays shorter, and are also our sense, and to some degree, and this is maybe a failing in the play, gives us less of a sense of the fall of Macbeth as a great man into this demonic figure. Because that's what a tragedy requires, a sense of the great fall. Here we have a great man, and he is brought down. There are other plays presented a little bit better by Shakespeare. Like Hamlet. We have a sense there's something great about this fellow. Doesn't come down right away. King Lear is like Macbeth. Right away, he throws away his kingdom. It's insane. Divides it up. Brings about civil war. The king does this. It's an act of insanity. It's unnatural. The whole play is about nature. Lear. Othello, plays on a little bit longer, but again, the figure's a great figure. He is a great man. He is a warrior. He is, although he's a black-skinned man, he is leading the city of Venice. And they revere him because of his greatness as a man, not because of his lineage, because he's not even one of them. He's a foreigner, and he's ruling over Venice as their protector. So this is a man of greatness who comes down to the ground. Same here. Macbeth is a great man. You have to see him that way. So he becomes the victim of his own will. He wills for the evil act to be his good. And as a consequence, he loses his freedom. So he chooses to do the thing that he lawfully ought not to do. He commits a licentious act. As a consequence of that, he loses his freedom. And the more he acts upon this, the lower he descends into hell. So it's a really interesting portrait. It's a character portrait. It has political consequences. It has natural law consequences. It has theological consequences. It's all over the place. And Shakespeare plays them all out in front of our eyes. It's not just a play about psychology. The Romantic Sonnet is a play about psychology. This is pathetically shallow reading. It is, there's no doubt about the psychological vividness of it, but there's a lot more in this play than that. Now, let me turn our gaze to Lady Macbeth, who's an extraordinary figure, one of the more famous figures in Shakespeare's plays, the ultimate temptress, I submit to you. She commits not one of the crimes that Macbeth does. And yet, there's a decided sense, I think, that she may be more evil than her own husband. And even more responsible. And the two, to some degree, reflect Shakespeare's use of foils again. There are other men there that are foils for Macbeth, like Macduff, I guess, like Banquo. But even Lady Macbeth seems to reflect something of Macbeth's own qualities, and yet with distinctions. I think in some ways both represent the will, but his is a rational will. He knows what he is doing, and he decides to do it. That makes him, in some sense, more evil, because with that awareness of an adult and a morally responsible agent to do an evil thing then is, of course, damnable and particularly stupid, whereas she seems to be unreflective. She pushes Macbeth, calls upon him to be a man. Contemporary psychology would, and I don't like the phrase, and I think it's ridiculous in some ways, would refer to this as the reptilian brain. So it's that unreflective, appetitive side of human nature which makes us desire things, will them, even though we haven't really thought about it. We just need it, like the need for food or sex or thirst. It's the brain then. Note again, it's reductionistic. We have no choice in the matter. She pushes him, but she doesn't seem to see moral consequences. I don't like the idea that this is the reptilian brain, but I'm just trying to illustrate. It's that thing she doesn't see. She lusts after power. And her husband, do it. And in that, she also seems to represent the prototypical feminist. So here I'll have fun. Because what she does is she makes a caricature of the male and the female. The man is going to be more manly than Macbeth is willing to be. Now, Macbeth is a very manly man. He's courageous. He's an honorable man. And she upbraids him for not being man enough to do what his ambition dictates. If you did this, you would be more of a man. And she, likewise, in order to overcome even her reservations, calls upon herself to be unsexed so that she feels no milk of human compassion. She doesn't want to be a woman to do what she wants to do, so she'll have to unsex herself. So she pushes men to be immoral and ambitious and willful. And that's the portrait of masculinity presented by Lady Macbeth. And she, in order to enact this, has to remove her own femininity. And in that, they both reflect, to some degree, the witches, for whom fair is foul and foul is fair. The women with beards. Right, so this creature, this hybrid that somehow occupies the space between true masculinity and true femininity, between morality and immorality, they suggest there's a gray area there, and we can operate within that. So that's the truly demonic thing Shakespeare seems to me to be suggesting. Not the influence of evil spirits, but the suggestions that we can operate in a realm of grayness, in a fog. And goodness will come out of it. That's what the play is about. This is why it's such a great play, and people realize this, I think.
So are you equating her unsexed idea with feminism?
Yes.
Can you expand on that a little?
I will do it when I come. Do it when I come to the scene.
Okay.
Yeah, but so I'm sketching out what I think. She's a really interesting character there, and that seems to be. I mean, those are her own words, right? She wants to be unsexed, and calls upon herself and seems to despise her own femininity because it's compassionate, because it would make her love virtuous things. It would love the good, and she needs to do something that is evil. So there's nothing reflective about it, but it's just sympathy for. She talks about if she had a baby at her breast, she'd throw it, dash its brains on the ground. Well, like, what mother would do this? No mother. But she wishes that, because that aspect of her she despises. The soft side of her. She doesn't want to be soft. She wants to be like a man. But the portrait of the man, which she calls her husband to be, is no man.
Even the good men in this play would never...
They would never do that. They're not going to be dashing babies' heads on rocks. Correct. And no soldier who was worthy of that name would ever do such a thing. This is a war crime. It's justly condemned. This is not manliness. To do whatever your power allows you to do is not being a man. It's being a monster. And those misrepresentations of what constitutes femininity and the self-loathing of Lady Macbeth entails a misrepresentation of masculinity and the loathing of that as well. It's a rebellion against creation and the created order. It's a will to power. Yes?
So it kind of seems like what you just said, like it is like a total misrepresentation of masculinity. As she says, like here she's like...
Wherever you, what line, what have you got here?
Line, it's like a line in the 40s.
Act scene?
Of Act 1.
Act 1. Scene 3.
And she says of direst cruelty. So it's like she equates masculinity with cruelty itself. Mm-hmm. It's like there's no nuance to the masculinity. It's just like all men are cruel, and she wants to be like that in a way.
Yeah, and again, are women not capable of cruelty?
Definitely.
Yeah. At least we have honesty here. Of course they are. Of course they are. They may be more cruel. Who knows? It doesn't matter. I mean, that's a stupid argument. But the association of masculinity with raw exertions of power without remorse, this is absurd. But again, how are men portrayed by feminists who are wanting to assert their femininity is exactly in that same sort of caricature. But along with that, because remember, man and women are created in God's image, and they're meant to be complementary. One of the ways in which you can undermine yourself is by diminishing or attacking your sexually complementary opposite, because you fall with that. So for men, if they're misogynists, they can abuse women and debase them, humiliate them, treat them terribly. How do women do it? Well, they have their own ways, but this is one of the ways. And in that, they distort their own self in the process. At least that seems to me what Shakespeare is doing. Is portraying that. Now, I called it feminist. Some people will like the term feminist and say, well, hold on, I want to hold on to something good there, and I'm sympathetic. You know, being a strong woman, you should be if you're a woman. Of course, yes.
That kind of talk has to be applied to misandry.
Yes, it is. We would call it misandry. It's just a term that's not much used these days.
Mm-hmm.
It's politically incorrect. Women can't do that. They would never do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And she even calls upon the demonic or diabolical powers to take possession of her. She wants to be possessed. And associates being spiritually possessed with being unsexed. What does that say about contemporary concepts of gender in relation to sexuality? I'm not going to connect dots, they're connected enough. Is our will being really fulfilled if we seek to put ourselves to one side, as we are? Is it really for ourselves that we are we benefiting from the act of will? Yeah.
All this tells us is what Shakespeare would have thought about it.
Correct.
It doesn't tell us whether he's right about that.
Correct. That's a wider discussion. I'm teaching a Shakespeare class. Yeah. But the reflection on it, I think, is important. But I'm teaching a Shakespeare class here, so I don't go too far into that. I have my own views on it, as you can well imagine. I didn't think it was that funny, but okay. So why would she, it begs the question, why would she want to be unsexed? Well, it is because of this. She believes she cannot succeed in her desires if she remains a woman. So she has to be more than a woman or less than a woman, but in either case, whatever side you fall upon, it is not to be as she is. So she hates herself. That's my point. Yes?
It's definitely, I feel like the language, obviously we know Shakespeare is very specific in this language, and he says unsex, which is a reduction. It is a...
What's a creature without a sex?
Right.
First thing a baby comes out of the womb, everyone asks, was it a boy or was it a girl? Well, these days that's, imposing a sex on the child, that...
But nonsense.
Well, you may say it's nonsense, and it may be nonsense.
It is
Thank you. But the idea that it's assigned at birth suggests that the people external to the child have determined the child's sex by virtue of simply saying it's a boy or a girl, whereas actually they're saying it. Why do people even ask the question? It's an interesting question, by the way. It's the first thing you ask.
It's also like...
It's because we relate to the sexes differently. And I'll know how I relate to this child if it's a little baby girl, because I relate to if I'm a man, to the opposite sex in a different way than I do to another man. I think that's one of the reasons. There's something deep in that question, which sounds like a very superficial one. There's something profound in the question. That's why we ask it. But when she wants to unsex herself, it's to remove something of her identity. She's losing her humanity. Yes?
People spent thousands of years of human civilization. Each civilization has had a different way of what they thought would determine or figure out what the sex of their baby would be when it was born.
Oh, you can tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree or something like whatever. I mean, I don't think that has anything to do with it, but...
But I mean, like, even now, there's the debate that people have about whether they want to find out the sex of their baby.
Yep.
Right? Like, there is an importance to it.
Sure. And it's not just social.
If it was social, it wouldn't exist across all cultures.
Correct. In the same way. Pretty much. So, whereas Macbeth sees that if he does the unnatural act, he will be violating his humanity, and chiefly his word. He's given his word, and his word is his bond, and his bond is to first of all, his guest, because King Duncan is his guest, and hospitality is one of the most basic marks of human civilization. We saw that when we studied the Odyssey. But it's characteristic of of Middle Eastern cultures in general. And it's certainly there in Scripture to offer hospitality is a command and understood as a mark of civilization. And King Duncan, by coming under his roof, is now his guest. So to kill your guest is a terrible act. Furthermore, he will be acting against a kinsman, a blood relative. And finally, he will be acting against the king, the man who operates under God's blessing to rule over the kingdom. It's a triple violation of the order of nature. Yes.
Do you think that would be kind of a nod to Dante's Inferno, the ninth
Of course.
Hell, where it's all
Yes.
three of those
Yes.
like stations?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's not good.
That is a good way of putting it. This is not good. This is 3 times not good. Yeah. And he understands that if he does this, he will deny his own humanity. That's what's at stake here. So he understands himself as a moral agent, and that moral agency that he possesses is the most important part of himself, other than his ambition, because it's the ambition that leads him to set it aside. But note that he does not operate without external causes around him. One is the witch's prophecy. He has that in his mind. It's tempting him. And then he has his wife. They don't have any children. But his wife is ambitious. And the two of them work well together. She wants what he wants. He wants honor and power. She wants it for him. How many bad men have a bad woman behind them? You always hear about the great men with the great women. I think there's no doubt about that. How many bad men have had bad women also with them? Yes?
This is a reflection of Adam and Eve. In the garden.
Absolutely. Rebellion against God. The two of them collaborate.
If you kill the king, you'll have the kingdom. If you break God's law, you will have the knowledge and the power and the wisdom.
Yep.
And
Yep.
will be
You shall be as gods,
right?
knowing both good and
Kill the
evil.
king, you'll be the king.
What knowing both good and evil means determining good and evil. So if you do this, you will have the power to determine what is good and what is evil. Even the evil thing that you did, you can call good after the fact, because you will have absolute power.
Right.
So it's a blow against the king, but ultimately there's the fourth level. It is against God.
Because it's post-Reformation, and so the king.
But even before this,
I'm just saying, like in light of that, they're going to be the people watching the play are going to be thinking, yes, the king is the head of the church. The king is the person that
also.
What is
Yes, although that's not expressed in the play, interestingly, because again it's set before that. But even Christian considerations aren't expressed in the play. There's no bishops that come in and so forth. King's not spoken as in the context of where's the church and all that. Don't seem to be there.
But even pre-Reformation.
Oh yeah, and I'm not saying that. Of course they do. And
like
Scotland was Christianized by this point, right? So Shakespeare's presented it, willfully presented it in a way that as if it weren't that way. Just like Beowulf, the author of Beowulf presents the events there in a sort of a pre-Christian era, but the author himself is Christian.
Right.
His reflection on it is.
interesting that they still use the word thane, even though it's Christianized.
Sure.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's just a Scottish lord, right? But yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but you're right. Yeah.
So I just have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So since a large portion of the people who would be playing this would be men, a man playing Lady Macbeth, is there an element of irony in that? And would have Shakespeare have said, would that have been intentional on the part of Shakespeare, knowing that this would most likely be played by a man, to have a woman to want to be unsexed?
No, I don't think you'd be bothered by that. But you might see irony in it.
Is it a joke
No.
Yeah.
for like them to see this man on stage acting as a woman saying,
I
I
don't
need to
wanna be-
unsex myself and take this baby from my breast?
Yeah,
I don't.
is that-
Well, I don't think so. But that's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what the answer would be. But I don't think there's any
that would
laughing
be-
amongst the audience. No, that's our reaction. Well, this is ridiculous. Why are men acting in drag, acting like women, and then talking about the problems of womanhood and wishing that they were unsexed or something like that? I mean, that's our debunking of Shakespeare's worldview, when really he's just. I don't think that bothers his audience. I really don't. But maybe I'm wrong. Yes.
Was Shakespeare thought listening to his wife. And
Sure, just like Adam and Eve.
Yeah, because like.
And he's
not
responsible.
ahead of
Also,
right?
he's more guilty than she is.
That's kind of what
I think you're right. I'm just saying there is a sense that, so I agree with you, but there's a sense that maybe Lady Macbeth is even more evil because he's saying, I don't want to do it, and she eggs him on and say, okay, so she's the instigator, and say, yeah, but he actually has the moral objection, and he articulates his moral objections. And at the end of the day, he's the one who does the deed. You can't blame her for it. Well, you made me do it. Come on.
Kind of reminds me of how Charles Manson went to prison even though he never
Right.
did anything.
Right. Oh yeah, the men who do terrible deeds, they're never, it's not their fault. Somebody else, right? But again, they wash their hands. And he's having transcended that boundary, which he clearly sees, he then has no remorse thereafter. She, who won't recognize it, can't get the blood off her hands. So she wasn't even persuaded by her own arguments in the end. And she couldn't get rid of the milk of human compassion, the milk of human kindness, which she wished she could rid herself of. She has a terribly guilty conscience after that. So she's a less wicked character than she appears at the outset, whereas he seems better and gets worse. So they're, again, as I say, they're foils for one another in some way. And they exhibit the power of the will and the moral conscience and all that. So really interesting. And I think even if you say it's Shakespeare's worldview, which it plainly is, seems to be borne out by my experience in life and how people respond to evil acts as well. Like it sears their conscience if you do that. And sometimes people are unaware of what they did, but then years later they're traumatized by an event that they did and they hadn't realized really what they were doing at the time. But they're like, I was there and I did that, and they just can't get the guilt. I can't get rid of it, and they're in therapy and it just won't go away. So that seems to me all very realistic. Anyway, but he acknowledges his place in the chain of being. And when Shakespeare or Macbeth uses the word man, he uses it in, and I've said this before, he uses it in an inclusive sense. He means humanity. He uses it in the same sense that the Bible does. So if he says, I do this, I will be no man, he doesn't mean where she does. She's reducing man to the masculine, whereas he speaks of man as an inclusive term, including the female, and having a moral dimension. So he has a broader sense of it. So for Lady Macbeth, man's the opposite of woman. For Macbeth, man is the moral agent, of which women also are.
In the sense of mankind?
Sense of mankind. Yeah, that kind. So, and she accuses, Lady Macbeth accuses Macbeth of being too nurturing. You know, you're a woman. Stop that. By the way, and this is telling, she does claim that she has a feminine side in her, but she wishes to destroy it. It's not that it's not there. She has that, and she wants it gone. So she asks Macbeth to attack his moral reasoning, and she wants to rid herself of all femininity. That's why I say that, and that seems to me characteristic of modern feminism as well. So that is my comment. You don't have to like it. I expect everyone to like it. So she uses nurturing images of Macbeth just in order to mock him. And so she's a rhetorician. And so in a sense, she's also acting in the guise of the devil, if you will. She is trying to persuade him in the same way the witches have done. Suggesting moral neutrality and even natural neutrality. Whereas Shakespeare is presenting in Macbeth the character in his understanding of natural law and something that simply exists in the way that God has created. It's part of the divinely created order. It is not something that's a matter of convention. It just is that way. Yes?
Is there a major difference in the sense that the witches tell and Lady Macbeth persuades or
Yes.
convinces?
Yes.
Is that an important distinction that we should know?
Why? Why do you say so? I'm curious.
For me, convincing.
So they prophesy, they tell, and she persuades.
For me, saying, like, if I told you you're going to kill someone, compared to if I persuaded you.
Go on, kill him. Yeah, you'll get this and get that.
Just stab him. He's your brother. You'll get his.
But you'll get this
money
and
in the will.
right.
Right, like.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Nobody will know.
Like, there's a major difference to me.
Right. So she's more
'Cause you can
culpable.
say- 'cause you can say
So she's
that,
more
right?
culpable than the witches by your account.
Because if I say to you, kill that, or you're going to kill that guy, you can say, no, I won't, and then you just don't. You
But
just
what if
choose
I?
not to.
But what if I were a
Right, 'cause you
Christian?
said-
What if I were a Christian and you said to me,
You
"God
said-
told me"?
Then isn't there an issue of consent?
That's up to your discernment of the Holy Spirit and of the Holy Spirit.
But I've heard people say regularly in this college that somebody's told, God's told me that I'm supposed to marry you.
Not every-
Oh yeah, it's the ultimate, after rejection, well, God told me, and it's like, oh well.
I think a lot of people don't have a very good discernment of the Holy
Well,
Spirit.
I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying.
And I think a lot of people hear what they want to hear.
Isn't it more about the idea of consenting to do it? So
Yeah, absolutely. So again, but it illustrates that he has a choice and a
right.
will.
So when the witches say this is what's going to happen, he still has choices of how it's going to happen, whether he's going to act on it, whether he's going to do anything. But Lady Macbeth is really, sorry to pick on guys, but she's like the boy saying, come on, sweetheart, let's, Like,
She's not like the boy. She's like the girl
Well,
saying
she's-
that.
But I'm saying like the pressure.
She's saying
putting
she's
on
like the
him,
girl saying,
the
"Come
pressure-
on," and employing her sexuality to coerce her husband to do something that he sees as wrong. I don't accept the metaphor there. She is being a woman, and using her femininity to get him to do something he doesn't want to do. And boy, you can't tell me that doesn't happen, because it does. Now, so then Lady Macbeth is, in some sense, a Machiavellian. She regards virtue as not a real thing. It's that you have to appear virtuous, but you mustn't be virtuous, because there's power that comes in ignoring those things. So again, Shakespeare's exploring, is there such thing as a morally neutral act? Machiavelli seems to suggest that there is. Shakespeare says there is certainly not. He speaks regularly against the Machiavellian impulse in politics. That might makes right, or whatever you will. At the end of the day, if you get the outcome you desire, then it's okay. And the victors write the history of the account of what happened historically. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Shakespeare doesn't agree with that simply because there will be a judgment at the end of all days, and even if the victors have written the history, they themselves will be subject to the true account of what happens at the end of days. That's Shakespeare believes that there will be a judgment, but in his plays, he's not satisfied with that. The judgment happens within the plays. There's never, well, will you wait and then God will judge you when history's over. It happens within the short space of the play. There's a really quick reversion to order when the violation happens, and that's because, again, Shakespeare is a Renaissance dramatist who wants to teach his audience about the moral nature of what's going on. And to do that means to show that evil does not get what it wishes ultimately. It always gets its comeuppance. He's consistent in it. There's no ambiguity on how Shakespeare portrays that. Yes?
Two things. One, I think that's also a sign that he definitely knows his audience and obviously knows the atmosphere of the time, because people know this is pre-enlightenment.
Maybe he just thinks that.
Sure.
He knows his audience. They all agree on it.
They all agree on it, is what
Right.
I'm saying, right? And
Yeah.
so if he didn't do that, it'd be
They would.
scandalous.
Oh no, they would hunt him off. They
Right.
would.
He wouldn't have the success that he wouldn't.
He wouldn't. It's not just he wouldn't have success. He would never perform another play.
Right.
They would regard him as a wicked teacher,
Right. Exactly. But the other thing.
just like Game of Thrones, which we go back to all the time.
Right.
No, really.
The other thing I was going to mention though was I was thinking about we keep coming back to Lady Macbeth. I'm sorry, but I was thinking about Lady Macbeth compared to the witches, and the witches being supernatural. I was thinking about how in A Midsummer Night's Dream, the fairies don't really seem to. I don't know if they have free will. They seem to be in like some sort of gray area between having free will and not.
And what they're not is they're not evil.
Right.
They're sort of ambiguous. They're neutral.
And I feel like the witches are, in Shakespeare, I feel like it's the same theme.
Oh, really? I get no, they're not ambiguous.
No,
because
you don't
right at
think
the
that?
beginning, they say fair is foul, foul is fair.
Right.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
fair.
right out from the outset, they announce their evil intent.
And they're performing little sacrifices of animals and stuff like that, and they're calling upon Hecate, the goddess of the underworld, which is a figure of Satan and so forth. So no, they're diabolical. They're called witches as well, and this is Scotland, early 16th century. No, they're not neutral. So there are similarities, but there are also differences. But again, in comparing and contrasting, because the comparison is worthy to make, he's exploring, so well, what's the difference then between good spirits and evil spirits, or maybe not good spirits, but sort of neutral powers over nature? Because Shakespeare, C.S. Lewis also talks about the same things, and so does Tolkien. There are figures that seem to have a power that goes beyond the natural and yet is using nature and affirming nature, like Gandalf, right? Or in Lewis, the Dryads or Aslan and so forth. So they're calling upon nature to act like nature, and the whole of nature rebels against what's happened. In this case, the Dunsinane Wood is going to get up and march towards them, apparently. Right? So it's a natural rebellion against a moral rebellion, which is seen as deeply unnatural. But for Shakespeare, morality and what we would call nature are congruent. They are consonant with one another. They act in accordance with one another. Philosophy in this day, by the way, would be divided into natural philosophy and moral philosophy. Those are the two branches. Natural philosophy refers to the world outside of humanity. Moral philosophy refers to everything related to mankind, including politics and ethics and history. Those are moral philosophy. But they fit together in a seamless, or not seamless, but a garment woven together, the 7 liberal arts. So Macbeth's crime is desperate precisely because it is self-defeating. He has no heir. He has no natural heir. You have to remember that as well. Like, what's the point in killing the king and becoming the king and seizing upon the kingdom if you can't pass it on to anyone? I mean, it's, even by that standard, it is a self-defeat. Who's going to be his heir? He has no children.
And his wife, like, in saying, I'd sex myself, if I had a child, I would dash its head against
Although she does actually refer to having had a child in the play. I don't know where the line is now, but she refers to having had one, but we have no idea where the child is in the play. Doesn't appear in any way. Maybe the child died. Maybe she's in grief over that. Maybe that's why she is distorted the way she is. Distorted by grief. I don't know. For Lady Macbeth, if you take away the nurturing side of a man, you make him more of a man. Shakespeare, if you take away the nurturing side of a man, you turn him into a beast like no other. The Romans had a saying, and I'm on my short leash here, so I don't know if I can get it on the board here without tearing everything down. Oops. Lupo. Man is a wolf to man. Predator, not just a predator, but like a wolf. This is how human beings are. There is no creature quite so foul as a human being. There's also no figure quite so exalted. Shakespeare presents both sides. There's no more noble creature than a human being. There's also no more wicked creature than a human being. It's in a Roman proverb, pre-Christian. Just an observation about how awful people are, particularly in the theater of war, where there are no rules, right? So that's your point. There are no rules when war is happening. Like, it's chaos. And if there's somebody there, you kill him, right? Because he's going to kill you if you don't. Well, if he goes down, what do? Well, you kill him. That's not very fair. Somebody slips. Yeah, but that was your opportunity, and you kill him. That's a terrible thing, right? it's a cowardly act. Well, not in the act of war, it's not, because that's your enemy and he's going to get up.
Jesus never calls soldiers murderers. All
No.
he says is that those that live by the sword will die by the sword.
That's
Saying
correct.
that if you put yourself into that situation, you have to accept that you might pay
Yes.
the price for that situation.
Yes.
Like, so,
The centurion acknowledged who Christ was.
right.
He was not told he had to leave the military to go on anywhere. We have no indication that there were some in Caesar's own household who were.
Is he not told that he has the greatest faith in
Yep.
Galilee?
Yep. How could that be? He's a soldier.
And when he acknowledges that he too is a man under authority, he is understanding that bears that responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So would he have to walk away from being a soldier then? Some say yes. I don't think that that's reflected in Scripture. Romans 13 says that those who bear the sword do it under God's authority, and they don't bear it in vain. How can they bear the sword under God's authority if bearing the sword is opposed to God? So Lady Macbeth, in some ways, is a Circe-like figure. She turns her husband into a swine, into a debased creature. And interestingly, she makes Duncan drunk, and it's in a state of, and these are Shakespeare's words, swinish sleep. So Shakespeare invites the comparison of a Circe figure, a witch, interestingly. Right? There are 3 witches, and now she's acting like a witch. So she makes him drunk. Deprives him of his reason, because that's what Circe does. She deprives the men to whom she gives her spicy drug and makes them drunk into beasts. And they can't speak anymore. Do they actually look like pigs running around? If you see films, they are reduced to pigs going around, oink oink, the oinker. I don't think that's what Homer had in mind.
I think they lose their reason.
They lose their reason, the capacity for reason, and then they're like pigs in that sense. And pigs are immoral in the sense they will eat anything, including their own kind. They eat absolutely anything. If you fall into a pig's den, watch out.
Interestingly enough,
Omnivores.
it's interesting to me that Homer, even then, compared them to pigs, that in the
An unclean animal.
They're an unclean animal.
Not for him, but
but yet they are.
yeah.
That whole idea of if you fall into a pig's pen, you better watch out. But also the sense that, like, even today, medically, pigs are the closest creature we have to human beings.
Yeah, they would have no awareness of that,
Right,
of
they
course.
wouldn't, but it's
In terms of
it's
genetics or whatever.
To me, it's interesting that comparison is still there.
Yeah, yeah. So it has more validity than it even appeared.
Right.
But they're talking more about the deprivation of reason, which is the mark of humanity.
Sure.
And moral awareness that goes with that reasoning. So the subversion of order and the problem of violence in the play. So it becomes the overwhelming obsession in the play, in fact. And the violence continues to breed more violence, precisely by the attempt to suppress those who would oppose the violence. The only way that Macbeth can stop his opponents is by killing them. And then he just keeps on killing. So all liberty, he's lost his own liberty, and he is going to deprive everybody else of their liberty and their life in order to stay in power. Power over what? He'll have no kingdom left if he kills everyone. So not only does he not have an heir, he won't have a kingdom. There are no men in this kingdom because they've all been killed by Macbeth in order to remain in power. In Act 2, Scene 4, as I say, to reflect what I've said here, he speaks of an omen in nature. This is Rossa with an old man. The old man speaks, and these are omens. Ross with an old man. Old man says, 70 I can remember well, within the volume of which time I have seen hours dreadful and things strange. But this sore night hath trifled former knowings. Huh? Good Father, thou seest the heavens, as troubled with man's act, threatens his bloody stage. By the clock 'tis day, and yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp. Is night predominance or the day's shame, that darkness does the face of earth and tomb, when living light should kiss it? 'Tis unnatural, says the old man, even like the deed that's done. On Tuesday last, a falcon, towering in her pride of place, was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed. Never happens. Owls don't kill falcons, but that, and comparison immediately in the reader's mind to Macbeth and Duncan, right? And Ross continues, and Duncan's horse is a thing most strange and certain, beauteous and swift. The minions of their race, turned wild in nature, broke their stalls, flung out, contending against obedience, as they would make war with mankind. Old man, 'tis said they eat each other. They did so, to the amazement of mine eyes that looked upon it. So these natural rebellions against their own nature and the created order are analogies of what's happened in the political order. So it's broken out all over the place in that sense. All forms of violence, and the violence are perversions of the natural order. But I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the actual instant itself in Act 1, Scene 4. The king, Lennox, Malcolm, Donalbain, attendants. Where shall I? No, it's not. That's not the scene where it'll be the one that follows it. But I wanted to look at Macbeth's speech here, which is an aside. So it's into his conscience and his thoughts here. Duncan says, "My worthy Cawdor," and then Macbeth aside, "the Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down, or else, or leap." So Cumberland has been now named, and that's a higher rank than his. So now there's an impediment between him and the kingship, right? Because if the king falls, the Duke of Cumberland will succeed to the throne. That's right. So the Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down, or else, or leap. For in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires. Let not see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand, yet let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see. And out he goes. His ambition, naked. Note that he's afraid of the dark, or the light, rather. The light is now his opponent. The light which will demonstrate what he does. He needs to do it in the cover of darkness. We saw that back in Midsummer Night's Dream again, where reasoning is subdued, where reasoning doesn't operate in the dark of the forest. Here it's where moral reasoning is put out. It's a consistent pattern there again. Duncan's response is, "True worthy Banquo," referring to Banquo then, "he is full so valiant," so a word that was said that we can't even hear, referring to Macbeth, "he is full so valiant, and in his commendations I am fed. It is a banquet to me. Let's after him whose care is gone before to bid us welcome. It is a peerless kinsman." Deep irony. Commenting on his cousin Macbeth, a peerless kinsman who's about to take his kinsman's life. Scene 5, and Lady Macbeth reading, and we get, this is just a famous sign, a famous scene, and brilliant. And if you're Lady Macbeth, wonderful to act. "Let me," so she's reading from her husband, "let me, they meet me in the day of success. And I have learned by the perfectest report." Note that it's not written in verse here. It's written in prose, so the lines run into one another. There's no order in the prose, so the ambition is spilling over the lines. It's just will and excitement expressed in it. So again, the form reflects the content. "And I have learned by the perfectest report, they have more in them than mortal knowledge. When I burnt in desire to question them further, they made themselves air, into which they vanished," referring to the witches. "Whiles I stood rapt in the wonder of it, came missives from the king, who all hailed me Thane of Cawdor, by which title before these weird sisters saluted me, and referred me to the coming on of time with, Hail, King thou that shalt be. This have I thought good to deliver thee, my dearest partner of greatness, that thou mightst not lose the dues of rejoicing by being ignorant of what greatness is promised thee. Lay it to thy heart, and farewell. And then her response, Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised. Yet do I fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, are not without ambition, but without the illness should attend it. What thou wouldst highly, that wouldst thou holily. Wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. Thou'st have great Glamis, that which cries, Thus thou must do, if thou have it. And that which rather thou dost fear to do than wishest should be undone. Hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise thee with the valor of my tongue, all that impedes thee from the golden round, which fate and metaphysical aid doth seem to have thee crowned withal. The golden round, which is the king's scepter, which you hold in his hand when he's crowned. A messenger comes in. She asks him, what is your tidings? Messenger, the king comes here tonight. And Lady Macbeth, thou art mad to say it. Is not thy master with him? Who, were it so, would have informed for preparation? So please you, it is true, our Thane is coming. One of my fellows had the speed of him, who, almost dead for breath, had scarcely more than would make up his message. Give him tending, he brings great news. And now her response. The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor make peace between the effect and it. Come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall, you murthering ministers, whatever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischief. Come, thick night, and pall me in the dunnest smoke of hell, that my keen knife see not the wound it makes, nor heaven peep through the blanket of the dark to cry, Hold, hold. And then Macbeth comes in. Great Glamis, worthy Cawdor, greater than both, by the all hail hereafter. Thy letters have transported me beyond this ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the instant. My dearest love, Duncan comes here tonight. And when goes hence? Tomorrow, as he purposes. Lady Macbeth, oh, never shall sun that morrow see. Your face, my Thane, is as a book, where men may read strange matters. To beguile the time, look like the time. Bear welcome in your eye, your hand, your tongue, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. He that's coming must be provided for, and you shall put this night's great business into my dispatch, which shall to all our nights and days to come give solely sovereign sway and masterdom. We will speak further. Only look up clear. To alter favor ever is to fear. Leave all the rest to me. So you can see the progression here. The two of them are matched by ambition. They clearly, like Shakespeare has to introduce, and in a few short lines, has to give us something of the character of the relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And it's not a complex portrait. They're united in their desire for greatness. Now, this is no bad thing in a wife, surely, that she should wish well of her husband. But her desire for this seems to exceed all bounds. That's the point. Whereas Macbeth's has a sense of boundaries, and to do what would do would undermine the very basis of his humanity, and he says that himself. But in scene 7, he wants to do it quickly because if he doesn't do it quickly, he'll hesitate because he has a strong moral objection to the act. So Macbeth, whereas on her part, she seems to hunger for it so strongly that she doesn't even have an objection. He has objections at this point, strong ones. Macbeth, if it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well if it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, but this blow might be the be-all and the end-all here. But here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. But in these cases, we still have judgment here, that we but teach bloody instructions, which, being taught, return to plague the inventor. In other words, if I do this act, I will bear the consequences. This is what we teach. He's been instructed. He understands that this will not be without consequences for him personally. If I commit an evil act, I will reap what I have sown. Measure for measure. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. I kill my king, I myself will die. He's here in double trust. He, referring to Duncan, double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then, as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, nor bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off, and pity, like a naked newborn babe striding the blast of heaven's cherubim, horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. Again, a reflection of his moral reservations, the conscience that he objects so strongly. There's nothing here. It will come back on me. He's fully aware of the consequences. Now, as I say, it's not we don't have time to, or Shakespeare doesn't have time in the play to give a sense of the greatness of Macbeth, but I think there's sufficient stuff there. He is a morally aware man. He knows the consequences. He's been promoted up the rank of the soldiers. This is not just a conniving so-and-so. It's not just a man with ambitions. It's a man who with moral awareness and has lived a good life up to this point. But his ambition will meet with that. What will become of it? Well, we've already spoke of that, but we'll pick it up next time and go on further.